Okay, let's jump on into this. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm so glad you all were able to make it out today, and thank you for joining. So let's get to Mr. Gallagher. Mr. Brian T. Gallagher. He joined the law firm of counsel Baradel, Kosmerl Nolan in August 2011. Prior to joining them, Mr. Gallagher served 5 years in the United States Air Force as a judge advocate general. Mr. Gallagher's stateside duty assignments allowed him to gain valuable trial experience defending the Air Force against federal lawsuits, as well as prosecuting cases involving drug conspiracies, assault, and various other felonies and misdemeanors. While deployed to Iraq, Mr. Gallagher was responsible for the management of the detainee review process at Camp Cropper, Iraq. Mr. Gallagher is admitted to practice in Maryland, Washington, D.C., and their respective federal district and bankruptcy courts, as well as Virginia. He was also granted the honor of being sworn into the bar of the United States Supreme Court on November 4th, 2014. Mr. Gallagher represents clients in landlord-tenant, foreclosure, note investing, loan restructuring, real property disputes, title issues, real property sales and acquisition, private lending, and the list goes on and on and on.
I was going to say, don't go horse going through all that.
So we want to welcome you, Mr. Gallagher. Thank you so much for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I love to do these things. I am heavily involved in representing the note community, and I look forward to these types of chats. So what I will say, hold on, let me get my view situated here. What I will say is that these things go much better if you guys participate with me. There's a couple things that I'll get through or that I have on the list to talk about, but if we can do this in a participatory fashion, I think everybody gets a little bit more out of it. So that being said, please do not hesitate to raise your hand, to interrupt me, to ask what you might think is a stupid question that I promise you will not be a stupid question, and that somebody else is probably thinking about but just doesn't want to ask. So that being said, one of the things that Tanya asked me to talk about, which I always find really, really funny, is the different entity structure. And one of the things that she asked me to talk about is an LLC versus a land trust versus a corporation. What I think is funny is I can always tell when somebody has put on a convention or a big speaking engagement on a topic that is a little bit outside the norm, because within a month or so, I get probably 5 calls of people asking me about these things. Land trust is no different. I think it was last year, year before last, all of a sudden I have all these people calling me, asking me about land trusts and whether they should do a land trust. Well, the person that they paid for this speaking engagement probably forgot to tell them that land trusts are a statutory creation that are only recognized in a very small handful of states. So before you go down the land trust rabbit hole, you really need to speak with an attorney to figure out whether your state recognizes land trusts. Because if you create a land trust in a state that doesn't recognize land trusts, you will have spent a lot of time and energy accomplishing absolutely nothing, because the state and anybody dealing with you will not be obligated to treat you as a land trust. They will be able to treat you as some sort of disregarded entity. Yes, Mr. James.
So welcome. I'm glad you're here. And the reason I really joined tonight, because I have some other things going on, is because I wanted to hear you speak on the land trust. So what I've been told is that Virginia recognizes land trusts, and that if you wanted to do a land trust, say for property in Maryland, you could actually get a firm in Virginia and you could do the land trust in Virginia to cover the property in Maryland. Can you speak to that?
That sounds extremely dubious to me. Did you get that from an attorney that was doing that?
No, I got it from Mr. Land Trust. I can't
Oh,
remember his, what is his name? I could tell you real quick. Bear with me. What is his name? You know what? Go ahead and speak, and I'll
Yeah.
just I'll put it in. Oh, wait a minute. Here you go. Land Trust. Randy Hughes. He's known as Mr. Land Trust. He does a lot of land trusts. He has a university on land trusts. That's where I'm hearing this.
Yeah, I think you have to be really, really careful, because what one state might consider to be a land trust is something different than what it might be in a different state. You know, what one state might, first off, land trusts really were created out of some of the bigger Western, Midwestern states. They kind of came out of that, and they came east a little bit. They really haven't gained much favor on the East Coast. Virginia has, I'm pretty sure it has something on the books for being a land trust. I would need to study the issue of whether, for instance, you owned a land in Maryland and you put it in the Virginia land trust, whether Maryland would recognize it as a land trust. It might. I'm just not 100% certain.
Cool.
Yeah, I think there's other ways of accomplishing the same goals of a land trust in a less risky fashion than land trusts.
Are you going to talk about that?
Well, I mean, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish with a land trust. I mean, if you're just trying to accomplish asset protection, there's different ways that you can accomplish that through LLCs. If you're trying to accomplish some sort of hereditary lineage, or if you're trying to create some sort of testamentary documents, there's different types of revocable and irrevocable trusts that most states do recognize. This is actually good that you talked about it, because it kind of blends into one of the other things that I wanted to talk about, which is a question I get all the time, and we can kind of come back to the land trust thing, but it bleeds into this as well, is LLCs and where you should form your LLC. And do you have to go to Delaware? Do you have to go to Wyoming and things like that? Unless there is a specific tax reason, unless there is a specific business conduct reason, the days of there being a benefit to you being a Delaware or a Wyoming trust have pretty much come and gone. And the reason being is that it used to be absolutely true. If you were going to do an LLC, you really should be in Wyoming or Delaware. And the reason is that LLCs were actually created in Wyoming. Wyoming was the first state back in the 70s to create an LLC. The IRS didn't start recognizing LLCs until about a decade later through the Delaware Limited Liability Act. So what happened is you had some states that recognized LLCs and had rules on the books for how you dealt with LLCs, and you had a vast majority of all these other states that didn't have any rules on the books for how to deal with LLCs or even how to recognize them. So what was happening is, if you tried to form an LLC in Maryland, or you tried to be an LLC, that's domesticated in Maryland, what was happening is they were just looking through that and saying, well, we don't really know what an LLC is, but we know who you are, Mr. Smith. So that's what this is. This is Mr. Smith. Those days have come and gone. Pretty much, every single state has their own limited liability company act that recognizes LLCs, that has a whole body of both statutory and court decided law about LLCs. And honestly, those laws, they don't differ all that much from state to state, in terms of each state's limited liability company act. So unless, like I said, unless there's a specific tax reason or, conduct of your business reason, the days of running to a certain state for LLCs have come and gone. The reason I say that is important when it comes to land trusts is that, not just like back in the day when not all states and not all court systems recognize limited liability companies, not all states understand what land trusts are, and not all states have books of laws on the books on how to deal with land trusts. So there's a lot of ambiguity that goes along with it.
That was helpful. I appreciate it. And if we have like land trust questions, that kind of thing, LLC questions, like you're the go-to guy, is that what?
Yeah, so so my practice, I'm licensed in Maryland, DC, and Virginia. So I help my clients, deal with assets that are specifically located in Maryland, DC, and Virginia. But I also act as like a de facto general counsel for a lot of my clients that are based throughout the country. And I help them with contract drafting and, entity setup, and help them, form their 506 funds and things like that.
Okay, now I have a question then.
Sure.
Because I am one of those Wyoming LLCers.
Mhm.
And I was told to do the Wyoming LLC simply because of two other reasons, because they help keep your anonymity. And also there's something called charging rights, which I can't explain totally, but something dealing with suing you and only having limits your liability or something like that. Can you speak to that? And is that still a good point to have now?
Sure. So I've set up LLCs in a lot of different states, and different states require different information in order to set up LLCs. Wyoming, as well as I know Maryland and Virginia, I can't remember about DC. You don't have to say Tanya Brown is the owner of this LLC. I'll file the documents on behalf of my clients. I'll be the resident agent. I will be the authorized signatory on the articles of organization. Because that's the other thing that you got to remember. With a limited liability company, there are two important governing documents. There is the articles of organization. That is the one-page document that you file with the state that says, my name is X, my principal office is Y, my resident agent is Z, and we were formed for the following purposes. That's on file. Anybody can look at that. In the states I mentioned, you don't have to submit anything that says who the owners are. So the only thing that the public knows is, okay, Brian Gallagher is their resident agent, and this is where their office is. Then the second important document with a limited liability company is the operating agreement, and that is the 30-page document that outlines all the rights and responsibilities of all the parties. And we can, Tanya, put a pin in talking about operating agreements for us to go back to that, because it's really important. So as far as the anonymity aspect of filing in Wyoming, whoever told you that is probably accurate. If you compare it to certain other jurisdictions, I feel like Texas, you might actually have to, I forget what state it was, I was just doing something in where you actually had to say who the members of the LLC were. So there's certain states that make you put on file who are the owners of the LLC. So you're not getting that anonymity aspect. As far as honestly, I'm not 100% sure what the charging thing is. But what I can speak to is the the personal liability protection. And that is something that is universal throughout all the states when it comes to an LLC. That is the entire reason that you form an LLC, is to give yourself that personal protection from liability, so that if something goes wrong with your company and your company gets sued, you individually can't be sued. Now, there are certain limited instances where the individual behind the LLC can be sued. And there's a whole body of law. There's, in law school, it was a couple months of our business organizations course that talked about piercing. It's called piercing the corporate veil. The corporate veil is what gives you the protection, gives you personally the protection. And how you pierce that and get to the individuals, to get to their assets, very narrow in what type of situations allow for that. And it's really confined to, for lack of a better way, you did some bad shit. You engaged in some sort of fraud, you engaged in some sort of deception, some sort of theft, something like that gets you through the corporate veil. Just screwing up, having a bad day and screwing something up, that doesn't allow somebody to pierce the corporate veil. Yes, Jim?
So just to speak to that, like I actually had a company that created my LLC. They run out in Nevada. They do a lot of research, teaching, that kind of thing. They were basically telling me that if I don't stay on top of like my operating agreement, my annual notes, all that kind of stuff, that a lawyer could come along and say, well, you're not really running this as a business, and therefore it's not really an LLC. And so now we can come after you. Is there any truth to that?
That's a hard, that would be a very, very hard case to make.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if you have, maybe what they are saying is that if you failed to keep up with your business registrations and you've allowed everything to lapse, then maybe, for instance, with LLCs, most states require you to file a yearly report, which is just a one-page, hey, we're still going, and maybe you pay $25 a year.
Try 300 in Maryland.
And you pay, if you fail to pay those reports, and maybe in that situation. But I mean, I've had situations where something like that's happened, and for instance, in Maryland, the case law is as soon as you get yourself back in good standing, it's as if you were never in bad standing. So
good to know. Thanks, Brian. I really appreciate you coming on and talking to us, and please make sure we get your contact information before the night's over.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
One of the things that Tanya, or that we mentioned that I want to go back to real quick, is the issue of operating agreements. And honestly, if you are a single member LLC, if you own 100% of the interests in your LLC, they're not that important. You own it, you do whatever you want to do. Not a big deal. If you have any partners in your LLC, it is the most important document in your company. Absolutely. And I really, really strongly recommend against trying to do it yourself if it's something that you've never done before, or just grabbing something offline and both of you signing it and moving forward with that. The reason I say that is basically, that's your prenup. That is, and it's more than your prenup. It's important for two big reasons. The two most important reasons or provisions in an operating agreement are: how's the money going to be spent and distributed? And then how do you guys break up? And if I had a nickel, well, thank God, I've made a decent career out of litigating when members of an LLC get into a fight and don't want to be partners anymore. There's, and if you have an operating agreement that doesn't speak to what's going to happen when, that doesn't speak to how you guys are going to break up, you guys are in for a long, tough road. Whereas if you do have something in there that defines, listen, if we start to not get along, and if we decide that one or the both of us don't want to do this anymore, or if, you know, you've started acting up and you're not carrying your weight, this is how we're going to get out of this. It is worth its weight in gold, and I highly encourage you guys to make sure you spend time on it and you get help with it, and it's going to be money well spent in the event that something goes wrong. So that's my plug. And if you haven't picked it up yet, I can't stress how important it is, if you're going into business with somebody else, that you guys have a strong operating agreement in place.
I have one thing that I just want to say is that Mr. Gallagher, I said at the top of the hour, has a hard stop. Is it at 7:20? So don't
Yes.
hold your questions until the end. Ask your questions now. So while you've got him and he's here, don't be shy. Ask your questions.
Oh, hi. I wanted to ask a question. Okay, I just did the LLC on the Maryland State website.
Uh-huh.
It's a single LLC myself.
Okay.
Do you think that I should have maybe went to an attorney to set it up? I mean, I just did it myself and paid
No.
them.
No, I mean, you just, it's just you're the only person in the company, you set it up yourself.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to make sure, like
Yeah.
the gentleman said, James, it is $300 a year. When I looked and I saw that my business wasn't in good standing, I'm like, what's going on? I called my accountant and he said, oh, just pay $300. As soon as you pay it, it'll be in good standing.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, okay, because I don't want to. I mean, I don't have anything. I haven't did anything yet, but I just want to always keep it in good standing.
Yeah. No, you got it.
Oh, okay, okay, thank you.
Anybody else have a question?
Yes,
Okay.
I have a question about the notion of like a holding LLC, one LLC that basically is like the holding LLC for other LLCs that then own the properties that no investors invest in. What is that all about? How do you structure something like that? When is it necessary? Why would you do that? Or should you
Sure.
not do that?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So it's a good question, and it's a good question because there is not a black and white answer to it. It's part organization, it's part comfort level answer. People will start to separate out assets and spread their assets out so that they are not all held within the same umbrella. So if you have 100 notes and something goes wrong with one of your notes and you get sued, and all those notes are owned by that same LLC, they're all assets of the LLC that, you know, are subject to that judgment. Whereas if, you know, let's say, for instance, you've structured your organization such that, you know, while you are while you're working an asset, say you have, you know, all of your non-performing loans are held in, you know, one LLC, all of your performing loans are held in another LLC. And then in the instances in which you have to foreclose on a property and take it back REO, you have another entity that is set up to hold real estate. So it's honestly, it's a question. There's not a black and white answer. It's a question of organization, and it's a question of asset protection. And it's something you should also talk to about with your tax professional, because there's a lot of tax implications with that stuff too. That was kind of roundabout, Nicole. Did that kind of get to what you were asking?
Yeah, it did, and I do understand the premise behind having the different LLCs for like the different scenarios that you mentioned. I think my what I was mainly getting at was like the structure of having like a holding LLC and LLCs underneath that LLC.
Okay, I get it.
Or,
So
yeah,
okay, I get what you're asking. So LLCs don't have to be owned by people. LLCs can be owned by other LLCs. So you can have a holding company LLC that holds 100% of the membership interest in Main Street 123 LLC and Main Street 99 LLC.
and that makes sense. So in that scenario, which one comes first? The LLC that's doing the holding, or the LLCs that are being held?
Yeah. So for instance, if Main Street 123 LLC gets sued, they can't, the person that's suing them can't also sue the LLC that's above them, that's the holding company.
Okay, so if I already have Main Street LLC, can I then create the LLC that I want to own Main Street, or I have to create the one that I want to own Main Street first?
No, you can do it either way.
Okay.
You would just have to assign the membership interest.
Gotcha.
You know, so if Nicole owns 100% of the membership interest in Main Street 123, but she wants the holding company to actually own Main Street LLC, you would just
Assign the
execute
interest.
an assignment of membership interest to
Got it.
the holding company.
Thank you. That does get to that answers my question and then some. That gives me some additional information as well. Thank you.
Great.
Piggybacking off of that holding LLC and the agreement from the one LLC that's owned by the holding LLC, is that done in the operating agreement?
So the operating agreement would identify the owner of the company that's held. Yes.
Okay.
And it would identify the owner as the holding company.
Okay.
Correct.
Even if it is a single member LLC.
Yeah, and
Okay.
and because keep in mind also that operating agreements also define the owners.
Okay. And so as note investors, would you recommend LLCs over corporations, or what is the difference there?
So it's the $1 million question, to be honest with you. Generally speaking, LLCs are far easier, and there are usually not too many good reasons, especially when you're just starting a company, why you should do a corporation. First off, it's a question for your tax professional. Anytime anybody asks me that question, I say, well, first off, you have to talk to your tax professional to get their 2 cents on it. If they tell you it doesn't matter, then I'm going to tell you you should do an LLC because it's easier. Forming corporations usually are a little bit more expensive because most states, the filing fees to get a corporation started are usually based on the number of outstanding shares. There are requirements for corporations as to how often you have to have meetings and things like that. There's none of that for LLCs. And furthermore, you know, with an LLC, you get to choose how you want to be treated from a tax standpoint. So now there might be certain aspirational reasons that you might want to start a corporation. For instance, some of my clients that start corporations, they do it because they know this thing's going to get heavy, this is going to get big, and I'm going to be bringing in certain investors, and I want to be able to issue them certain types of stock, as opposed to, you can still do most of that with an LLC, but sometimes it's easier to do some of that stuff with a corporation. But for the purposes of people getting started in note investing, I haven't seen a good reason why you should do a corporation versus an LLC.
Can I ask you a question? Do you think the difference between an S corp and a LLC, do you think, are they kind of similar or?
I mean, from an asset protection standpoint, they're just the same. You know, it's they both provide the same level of asset protection. Um, you know, it's in the eyes of the law. You know, if somebody's coming, you know, against you, it's going to be viewed the same. But how they are governed is substantially different. You know, with corporations, different states make you have a board of directors. They make you have a CEO. They make you have meetings where you take minutes, and you have to have a secretary. And there's a little less anonymity with some of that stuff.
So a S corp.
An S corp is a corporation. Same thing.
Oh, okay, okay. Because I was wondering, can you be like one person in an S corp, or it's
Yeah, you can be an owner of 100% of the stock in a corporation. Yeah.
okay, okay. Thank you.
So just to kind of piggyback off of that, now this may be more tax related, and I know that's not your lane, but when you apply for an EIN for your LLC as a single member LLC, the question is asked, do you want to be classified with the default classification of a disregarded entity, or do you want to be regarded as an S corp, or regarded as, it's another one, corporate status? So my assumption is that, okay, yes, it's an LLC, but for tax purposes, you can be regarded as S corp or corporate status. Do you have any information on that, or do you know anything about what that's about, or how that might come into play in the note space?
It's not something that's specific at all to the note space. It's a question for your tax professional. It's how you're going to file your tax returns.
Okay.
Are you going to pretend like the LLC doesn't exist and any income that you've received through your LLC is your income? Or are you going to treat your LLC as its own being that's going to file its own tax returns?
Okay. And I just brought that up because she was mentioning S corp, and I know for tax reasons you can function kind of like an S corp even though you are an LLC.
Yeah, that you get to choose how the IRS treats you.
Okay. Thank you.
Who else has a question? Okay, I have one question.
Sure.
I have a question. So I don't know if I was dreaming, if I was reading something, but apparently the $300 fee for Maryland is supposed to be going away if you file online, but it didn't when I filed. I saw something, I know it was a press release or something coming from.
It's the last 4-ish months or so, I think. There've been a bunch of changes to how things are registered and filed in Maryland. There used to be, when you filed online, you used to have to upload your articles of organization. Now you just answer some question and it creates an articles of organization for you. There used to be 2 choices for how you want to start it. Do you want to have it expedited where you get it really quick, or do you want it in the normal course where it'll take you a month to get it officially formed? Now there's 3 options. It's like normal course, expedited, and then super expedited. So yeah, honestly, things are changing. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, so I heard that, I was reading something too, Tanya, and they were saying that there was some legislation that they were going to present to do away with the filing fee, but they
Yeah.
haven't voted on any of that yet. So
Okay.
it's just something they're talking about at the legislative level. They're
Uh,
trying to make it, to try to make Maryland more business like friendly kind of thing. That's the way I understood it.
Okay. Thank you, Jim.
Sure.
In the case of an LLC that there are more than one member, so it's not single owned. If there is not an operating agreement in place, is there a default for like allocation for?
So if there's nothing in place, it would probably default to default to whatever the Maryland Limited Liability Company Act whatever provisions, because most of the provisions of pretty much every state's LLC Act state that unless specifically stated in the operating agreement, blah, blah, blah. You know, in pretty much every, so it would default to what it says there, unless there's some sort of oral agreement that you guys have.
Okay. Yeah, I made the big mistake of getting into that situation. And it has been painful, very, very painful. So that's a cautionary tale. I'm a cautionary tale to anybody. Don't do that. In my defense, it was with my husband, but that's a whole nother story.
It's always all good until it's not all good.
Until it's not all good, exactly.
Anybody have any other questions? We're coming close to that time. Can get them in. How can they reach you? I did put your contact information in the chat. I got that off of your website. It is Gallagher@councilbaradel.com.
That's the best way to get in touch with me.
Awesome. And I left your phone number in as 268-6600, extension 3420.
Yes.
So if you all need to reach out or have any questions, please reach out. If you want to get your LLC set up, this is the person to do it for you, to help you out. If you need any other thing, I know he has helped us with notes in Virginia and here in Baltimore also. I had one, actually I did have one in Baltimore. Somebody asked me, I think in our last class, if I ever had one. I did have one, but I brokered it off. I didn't really technically own it that long, but we had help with Mr. Gallagher. He helped us out with that one. He helped us out with this raggedy thing in Richmond. So, I mean, he knows it all, and he's a great help, very responsive. And we have just had a really good experience. So if anybody has any Jim, you had another question?
I do. I have
Appreciate
another
it, Tanya.
question.
Thank you.
So this is not a note question, Brian.
Sure.
But do you do stuff with like lease options and subject tos and all like that kind of
Yeah.
stuff if we needed
Oh,
help
yeah.
with
Oh, yeah.
the law?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, cool. Good to know. Thank you, sir. I really appreciated your talk tonight. Thank you.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure talking with you guys. I always love these things.
We greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much. Come back anytime. I'll be inviting you again.
Absolutely. I can't wait until we do it in person.
Awesome. That would be great. That would be great.
All right, guys. It was a pleasure talking to you. Take care now.
Thank you again. Take care.
All right,
Bye.
bye.
Thank you. Well, thank you all so much for coming. Appreciate you. Look for information for our upcoming one next month. We're the fourth Thursday of every month at 6:30, and we will see you there. I'll be sending more information out. Of course, you can always reach out to me if you need me. And I put my email and everything in the chat. Thank you all so much. Enjoy the game.
Thank you. Good
Hey,
night.
See you
good
all
everybody.
later.
night.